Here we go. Welcome, welcome. So my name's Scott Miller. I'm in Durham, North Carolina. I am an LSAT instructor with Manhattan Prep. I've been teaching LSAT for Manhattan Prep for about 6 years now. Most of that time, it's been my kind of primary occupation. Really excited to be here tonight doing these free prep hours. These are kind of fun. We get to give people some information for free, as the name implies. And also just, go over some, talk about some common issues that people have, some common areas where people want to improve on the LSAT. So we do have people who are joining us here live tonight. Welcome, welcome to everybody who's here with us live. And we're going to have some people watching us on YouTube. So if you're watching us on YouTube, welcome, welcome. We did, send out an email with a link to a form where people had a chance to ask questions, before the session tonight. And I do look at that form as I'm preparing the session, and I try to, I don't have a chance to necessarily answer every single question that people ask, but I do try to focus on the questions that, are the most common, right? The most common questions that people ask. I'm going to try to address as many of those as I can tonight. So we often in these free prep hours have kind of a mix of people. We have people who are, just starting out, have never done anything at all with the LSAT, no idea what the LSAT's all about. It's pretty common to have people like that in these free prep hours. And then sometimes we have people who have been preparing for a while, maybe several months, maybe a year you've been preparing for the LSAT. Maybe you've even taken an actual LSAT before. So, some of the sessions we've done before, we've had quite a few people who are really new, so we focused on some really basics and preliminaries. But we have quite a few people here tonight who are with us live tonight who have been practicing for a while and are somewhat familiar with the LSAT. So I'm going to try to address some of the questions that those people were asking and some of the topics that they asked to cover. So some of this, if you're really totally new to the LSAT, maybe a lot, maybe a little bit, a lot of information to take in at once, but that's okay. If you are new to the LSAT, first of all, there are some, and what we're going to focus on primarily tonight is timing and overall strategy and logic games and RC. We're kind of looking at big picture strategy because a lot of the questions that people asked in the form that we sent out before tonight's session really focus on that, big picture strategy. So that's what we're going to try to focus on. If you're really looking for information about like the basics, right? We actually have some good resources for that, including some free resources. So check out our Manhattan Prep LSAT YouTube channel. We have a lot of these free prep hours on there that we've recorded in the past. And if you just want to know the basics about, what is a logic game? How does a logic game work? You can find some really good free prep hour sessions on there where our instructors have covered, some really basic moving parts of logic games. Same thing with the essentials of reading comprehension on the LSAT. Reading comprehension on the LSAT is a little different from maybe other reading comprehension tests that you've taken. So we have some free prep hour sessions that cover specifically like the essentials of reading comprehension and really how you just in a basic way approach the reading comprehension section on the LSAT. We're also doing, we do, our regular LSAT complete courses, our 10-session complete courses, which you can register for and which, we charge for. But you can attend session 1 of any course for free, including for those that were here tonight, this upcoming Sunday, October 4th. I'm teaching a session 1 class. I have a new course that's starting. So if you're interested in what we do tonight, and especially if you want to go over like some of this stuff in a little bit more, like the logic games especially, a little more structured, piece by piece way, focusing on just the fundamentals of how you approach a logic game, in general, the session 1 class is really good for that. Or if you're a little more advanced, and you've been practicing for a while, and maybe you're thinking you want some extra help and you want to, take one of our courses. The session 1 courses, even if it's kind of a review for you, the session 1 class can actually give you an idea of how we teach things. So, and then we also have our LSAT Interact self-study program, which is based on, interactive recorded lessons online. You can sign up for a free trial of Interact and do a couple of Interact lessons for free. And again, a lot of these things will help you with some of the basic fundamentals of what we're talking about tonight. If you want to get that, more basic fundamental approach view help. All right, so, and we are going to be using Prep Test 65. We're also going to be using, I decided tonight it would be helpful to use some stuff from June 2007 test, which I know a lot of people are familiar with, right? The June 2007 test has been available for a while. A lot of people do that as their first, practice test, or do it really early in their LSAT prep somewhere. So we are going to use some content from that. And for those of you who are here tonight, I will share some links at the end of the class for some of our free resources, including, if you want to sign up for a free trial class, or if you want to, sign up for that free Interact trial. I'll share some links at the end of class that'll let you do that. If you're joining us on YouTube from on another day, you'll find these links in the description for the YouTube video. Okay. So let's dive into, so one of the things that people asked about, some of the questions that people asked about are kind of, I'm going to just read off some of the questions that people submitted earlier before class. Can you discuss how to choose which order to approach logic games questions in within each game? Can you discuss timing strategies and any benchmark times that we should have in mind for LG? What should I be focusing on to improve in the logic game section in general? So we have quite a few questions about, kind of a little bit more big picture strategy in logic games rather than just a particular game type and how you approach it. So what I'm going to do is show you a logic game. I'm going to give you 5.5 minutes. And it may be a game that you're familiar with. It may be a game that you just did 2 days ago, which is fine. Do it again. Start fresh. Set aside any notes you have about this game and just redo this game as if you're looking at it for the first time. I'm going to give you about 5.5 minutes to do your setup for this game and answer the questions. If you finish earlier than that, if you finish faster than that, then great. Go ahead and maybe review your work. Start your own review of your work. Think about, once you finish this game, what would you do? And then you took a little break. What would you actually do when you go back and review it? How would you go about that? And practice that. And then after about 5.5 minutes, we'll all come back together, and I will talk a little bit about, some suggestions for reviewing that lead into how you improve in those areas that people were asking about, right? So we're going to really cover two things. We're going to cover how to review your work after you complete a logic game, a timed logic game. How do you review your work? And then also, how does that help you discover things or learn things about your overall approach? Like, what's the order I should answer questions in, or how do I improve my timing? So that's what we're doing. You're going to see the setup. I'm only going to show you 3 questions. I'm not going to be giving you all the questions. We're just going to focus on the first 3 questions in the game. So that's what we're going to do. And if you're totally new to logic games and you have no idea what any of this is about, that's totally fine. Just read what's on the screen here next and answer the questions the best way you can. Just don't worry about the fact that maybe you're not exactly sure what we're doing here. Just try anyway. It's always a good thing to do. All right, so here we go. Got your scrap paper ready, got your pen or pencil ready, got your logic games brain cells engaged. Let's go ahead and work on this and answer the questions. Don't worry about putting the answers in the chat window or anything like that. Just make your own notes about the answers. And then when we come back in a few minutes, we'll talk about this. So here it is. Go ahead. I'll give you, like I said, 5.5 minutes. All right. That was 5 minutes. All right. So how about this? Let me do one thing here. On a scale of, let's say 1 to 10, with 1 being easy and 10 being super hard. In the chat window, I'd like everybody, if you would, to let me know how would you rate that that game that we just did. Okay. All right. Seeing some different answers coming in here. Good, good, good. Keep them coming. Okay. And if anybody wants to, in the chat window, you know, really whether you found it easy, hard, somewhere in between, if you would, just tell me in the chat window in 1 or 2 words, what was challenging about it? Oh, somebody said my first one, right on, 10. Yeah, of course it's a 10. All right. The rules, okay, the rules are a little bit confusing. Okay. All right. So keep them coming. If there was anything in there particularly, even if you didn't find it particularly challenging, if there was anything in there that was a bit challenging for you, you know, put it in the chat window. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. Like I said, a big focus here in our session today is going to be how we review and what we can learn from review that's going to help us perform better in the logic game section, right? Because that's really what reviewing is all about. And I find that actually reviewing is one of the most underestimated aspects of preparing for the LSAT, or underutilized maybe is the best word. You definitely, anytime you do timed work, you want to review your work. And if your idea of reviewing your work is just checking the answers and seeing if you got the right answer, that's you're really selling yourself short. So one of the most effective techniques that you can use is called blind review. And what blind review basically means is, in one way or another, you're marking questions while you're working. So it could be like, if you're using the digital format, right, like Law Hub, you're doing a digital prep test on LSAC's website, you might hit the little flag button and flag questions that you find difficult, you want to go back and review later. Or you might have a piece of paper next to you while you're working, and you just might write down the number of questions. You know, I want to review 7. Okay, I want to review 9. Just write down question numbers that you want to go back and review. And then make sure you go back and review those questions before you know what the answer is. It's so important, so helpful to review questions before you know what the answer is, because it forces you to think more carefully. I mean, there are a lot of reasons I can get into, and I've done other free prep hours where I've talked about the importance of blind review. So if you really want to know more about blind review and exactly how you do it and why you do it, go look for one of our free prep hour sessions called Review Right. It's about reviewing, you know, the most effective way. But anyway, so we're going to review our work, right? Anytime we do timed work like this, we're going to go back and review it, preferably maybe after taking a little break. And if you're reviewing a logic game, then the first thing you want to do is review your diagram, your setup, right? And if you're totally new to logic games, basically what you're going to do is you're going to read this little story they tell you, read it through, and then you're going to go back and draw a little sketch that represents each piece of information that they give you. And you know, you're going to diagram it. You're going to sketch this out in a way that helps you understand the game. So you don't have to go back and read all this over and over again every time you want to answer a question. But also, this should help you understand the game better and conceptualize it and make inferences. Inferences are going to be important too. So there are several different ways to diagram this game. I'm not going to say, you know, here's what my scrap paper might look like. And I'm not going to say that this is the only way to diagram this game. But this is, you know, this is one common way. So I have my elements, GHL. And then my rule, each of these GHL films are shown during a film club's festival held on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Okay, so I'm putting Thursday, Friday, and Saturday down. Each film is shown at least once, so 1 plus each. That's my representation of each film is shown at least once. There are a few different ways to represent that, but you can just make a little quick note like that. But never more than once on a given day, so 1 time maximum per day. Okay. And this is what you want to do when you're reviewing your logic game. You're going to do exactly what I'm doing. You're going to go back and take your time, put on some soft music, get yourself a glass of water, put your feet up, and really carefully look at each piece of information in the scenario and constraints here and how you diagrammed it. Wine, somebody's suggesting wine. That's totally fine. Yeah, you like prefer to review with wine. Maybe after you get into 5 and 6 games, that might get more interesting, but you know, it's up to you. So, but the idea here is, again, we're comparing each piece of information to what we put down on paper and seeing if you're just asking yourself, did I represent this correctly, right? We always want to make sure that our diagrams are accurate and clear. So if you realize that you misunderstood a rule and therefore misdiagrammed it, you want to think, why did I do that? Okay, what about this particular rule was confusing and, you know, caused me to misdiagram it? Or if a lot of times you're going to realize that you may have made mistakes on questions because you misread your own diagram, right? You're like, oh, I thought that meant this, but actually the rule says that. And so that may indicate that just the way you diagram the rule could have been less confusing, or you could do it in a way that's less confusing, that's more clear. Remember, it's not just diagramming it, it's in diagramming it in a way that's going to make sense to you, you know, 2 minutes later, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes later when you're trying to answer a question. All right, so then we have these rules, right? On each day, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not done with the scenario. On each day, at least one film is shown. So we know I have to have at least one film on each day. Somebody asked earlier in the chat window, I think, if this is a mixed game. And it kind of is, because we do have groups, right? Our groups are the days. You know, I can have a certain number of films shown Tuesday, a certain number, or sorry, Thursday, certain number Friday, a certain number Saturday. So those are kind of the days are kind of groups, but there's also an ordering element to it. So not only the order of the days, but I also have to keep track of, you know, when I look at the rules, the order that the films are shown on each day, which is why I tend to, you know, there are a couple ways to do this game, but I would tend to do it as like a number line with the number line divided into 3 days, each day films shown in a certain order. Now, also notice that on each day, at least one film is shown. So they haven't told me the maximum number each day. If you think about it for a second, why did I put 3 on each day here? Because they haven't told me exactly how many films are shown each day. Why would I put 3? Answer is because, yeah, it's the maximum, exactly. A couple people put that in the chat window. Excellent. 3 is the maximum. So without any other information and just as a starting point, you know, we call this, we do open grouping games where we do this, and this type of game we would do this. If you know only the minimum each day, but you don't know the maximum, it's kind of a safe bet to just list the maximum, as, you know, in each group, put enough spaces for the maximum possible. And then you may find later on that there are some limitations where, you know, it can't be all 3 each day. Nandi, you're saying you can't see the chat. I am not sure. Oh, let me fix that. Okay. So yeah, right now people are only able to chat to me. I'll change that. Thank you, Nandi. I'll change that so that, you know, you can see everybody can see everybody else's chat, so that you can see other people's comments. Thank you. Okay, so that's why I put 3 in each group, so that's the maximum possible in any possible scenario would be 3 in each group. So I'll just put that as a placeholder, and then later on we may figure out that it's not actually possible to see 3, have 3 in every group. So then I'm diagramming my rules, right? On Thursday, harvest is shown and no film is shown after it that day. Okay, so, you know, and again, this is a little bit of, you know, you're going to find that there are standard ways of diagramming. You know, certain rules you just always diagram the same way, and that may be based on how you learned it, where you learned it, whose course you took, whose book you read, or it may be just something that you came up with as a standard way of diagramming certain things. This rule is, you know, I mean, on Thursday, on T, H is shown, so I'm showing H on 2, and no film is shown after it, so I just put last there, right? H last. So I'm not sure if this is like any kind of standard diagram that you would see in one of our books or standard diagramming technique, but it's what made sense at the time. And that's okay. You know, you want to, as much as possible, have very standardized ways of diagramming the most common rules. But if you run into a rule that doesn't really fit with any of your standard diagramming techniques, it's okay to just make a note about it. You know, diagram it in a way that's accurate and that makes sense to you. So same thing with these other ones. On Friday, either greed or limelight is shown. either greed or limelight. So G/L, the slash means or, either or. Now, normally, if on a logic game, and this is something good to know about the LSAT, you might know this already, but on the LSAT, normally if they say something like, on Friday, either greed or limelight is shown, it could be both. So or is not automatically exclusive on the LSAT. If they say either greed or limelight is shown, it could be both. But if it's not both, if it can't be both, they will explicitly say, but not both. So that's why I put a little NB up here for not both, right? Because they told me it can't be both. And no other film is shown after it, so G or L, last. On Saturday, either greed or harvest is shown, but not both, and no other film is shown after it. So, sorry, Saturday. Saturday, either greed or harvest, a little slash there. NB to remind me it can't be both, not both, and that one, whichever one it is, will have to be last. So that's my basic diagram. And so again, what I'm doing is just kind of going through this, comparing each piece of information that I had, slowing down a little bit, taking my time a little bit, and comparing it to what I put on my scrap paper and just seeing, am I happy? Did I accurately diagram everything? Did I understand everything? If I didn't understand it, then maybe this time reading a little bit more slowly, I can understand it better. Once I understand it, then am I happy with the way I represented it on my diagram? Okay. So I'm going to look at, you guys have put a bunch of questions in the chat window. So let me take a second and look at some of these questions and see if I can answer them. Okay, is this a mixed game? I mean, it depends on what you call by a mix, what you mean by a mixed game. We use the term hybrid game for a game that is a mix of ordering and grouping. And I think you could kind of call this a hybrid game because we have the groups could be the days, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And we're thinking about which elements go together each day, but we're also keeping track of the ordering. Would I recommend reading the questions first? Deanna, no, I don't. I actually don't. I don't recommend reading the questions first because, and people ask that about reading comprehension as well. I think what happens when you read the story and then read all the questions and then try to go to work is you're just trying to stuff too much information in your brain at once. So I've personally found it more useful now. I do read all the way through the scenario and the constraints once before I start diagramming anything. So I get the big picture of what the game's all about, what the story's all about, and then I go back and look at each piece of information and put it down on paper. But I don't go and look at all the questions first. That's just, it's a lot of information to try to stuff into your brain and process. In fact, I lean towards the opposite. I tend to look for ways to break things down into smaller pieces and keep less information in my brain at any one time. And in logic games, especially less in my brain and more on paper. So that may, play into what you were asking, Deanna. Okay, let me see, other questions. Would it be wrong to put H in the last slot for Thursday? So one of the questions someone's asking is like, can I put H in the last slot for Thursday? So I could, as long as to you, that means that those other two slots are maybes, like they might not even exist. Right? Because all it says is on Thursday, harvest is shown and no film is shown after it. So that doesn't mean that there has to be anything at all before it. There could be things before it, right? But there doesn't have to be. So it's not wrong to put H last. That can work if that works for you, as long as you remember that these other slots are maybes. There could be something in them, maybe not, right? So some of the other questions. Okay. In LR, I find it's good to read the question first, but not in LG. Yeah, in LR is different because we are basically tackling one individual question at a time. They're not grouped in 4 groups like they are in logic games or RC. And in logical reasoning, yeah, I always recommend reading as you approach each individual question. You read the question stem first, and then go up and read the little story that they tell you. So yeah. Okay, so again, what we're talking about here is just, again, how do you review your diagram? How do you review the basic setup? And just one tip I'll leave you with is, before we move on to the next stage of reviewing, which is if you find that you very frequently misread a rule and you think, oh, that's just a dumb mistake, like, ugh, why did I do that? It may be that you're rushing. and I say this all the time, the secret to getting a high score on the LSAT is not going blindingly fast the whole time. The people who score the highest on this test know when they can go fast and should go fast and when they should slow down. And if you find that on a fairly regular basis, you're just misreading a rule or misunderstanding a rule, or you feel like you have to read a rule like 5 or 6 times in order to understand it, just that's an indication that you can slow down and should slow down a little bit as you read the scenario and the constraints, right? It's better to actually read it a little bit more slowly once and understand it rather than reading it really fast 5 times and not understanding it or misunderstanding it, right? I'm assuming that's a good question. With 5 minutes, how do we not rush? Yeah. Well, remember, I only gave you, 3 questions and not all, 6 questions in this game, I think. No, 5 questions in this game. So that's kind of on pace. If you're shooting for like 8 minutes and 45 seconds, that's a little bit fast. But it's a good, that's actually a good question. When time is tight, like in general on the LSAT, I only have 35 minutes to answer all these questions. How do I not rush? And one of the answers that I'm going to give you for that is it's better to skip and guess on a couple questions and give yourself time to do the other ones correctly rather than get more questions wrong by rushing. Like if I skip one question in each logic game, okay, I'm getting, there's 3 that I have a good chance of getting wrong because I only guessed. But if that allows me to, by working a little more slowly and feeling a little bit less time pressure, I can answer the other 20 questions correctly. 20 in a logic game section is not a bad score. And a lot of people actually, I see a lot of people who are just in such a rush because all they're thinking is, I have to get every question right. And when you start talking about, like, why don't you just try to get 20 right instead of all 23? And like skip 3 of them or skip 4 of them, get 19 correct, right? That's the key to timing strategy. When people talk about timing, how do I have enough time to answer all these questions? Part of the answer is you don't have to answer every question. Think about, and one of the questions people were asking is about, like, how do I improve from, I'm looking at some of the survey responses. How do I improve from where I am now, getting X number correct? Well, part of that is don't worry about how you're going to get every question correct. If you're getting 15 correct in logic games, on a logic game section most of the time, think about what you would need to do to get 17 correct. How do you get 2 more questions correct? And it may be by slowing down a little bit and not worrying about, a few of the questions in each game. And once you're there, then you think, okay, I'm getting 17 correct pretty consistently. Now, how do I go for 19? So a little bit of big picture. Again, I said, like, we're going to talk a little bit about big picture strategy here. And that's an important aspect of it. If you're only getting, 15 questions correct in a logic game section, and you're thinking, how do I answer every question correctly in 35 minutes? That's the problem. The question is, how do I get 2 more questions correct? Right? Okay. So, all right, let's keep going with our review here. So here we are, we're back. We've done our timed work. We've done this logic game. Now we're going to go and review. So the next thing I want to review after my basic diagram is I want to review inferences. So can somebody tell me in the chat window, if you know, just in a couple words, what's an inference in logic games? When we talk about making inferences, and a couple people ask questions about this too, making inferences in logic games. How do we make inferences? What is an inference? A deduction, combining rules. Yeah. So inferences basically are not explicitly stated, but must be true. That's a really good working definition of an inference in logic game. Something that's not explicitly stated in the rules and yet must be true. So people get really hung up on inferences sometimes. Either they seem like total magic and you just don't worry about them at all, or you start learning how to make them, you start learning how to make inferences, and then you get really worried that you're not making every possible one. So the idea is inferences are very helpful, but you can actually do really well in a logic game, even if you miss some important inferences, right? So I'm wondering, did anybody make any juicy inferences in this game? Anything that we could, and inference is often going to be something that you can add to your diagram by thinking about, for example, how do the rules connect to one another? Or is there a piece of information based on this rule that I know must be true? Yeah, Evelyn, Friday and Saturday can only have 2 movies shown. Why is that? Well, that's kind of a combination between 2 rules. Um, each movie can only appear 1 time each day, and G and L cannot both be on Friday. G and H cannot both be on Saturday. So I only have 3 elements that can go on any given day. 2 of them can't go together. So that means if I have G, I can't have L that day. On Saturday, if I have G, I can't have H. If I have H, I can't have G. So that means basically Friday and Saturday, we can mark one of these spaces off because you can never have all 3 elements. With G or L on Friday, it's either going to be one or the other. G and H on Saturday, either going to be one or the other. And that's a common thing in any game where like the number of spaces in each group is unknown. The maximum number is unknown. Total number is unknown. We call it like open grouping. Look for inferences based on that you can make about the number in each group. That's one of the reasons why I start off by just putting 3 spaces in each group, because that gives me a board to look at, a starting point to look at. And then by looking at the rules and considering the rules, I can often make an inference that, certain elements can't go in certain elements can't go in certain spaces, or certain groups can't have all 3 elements in them. Right. So that's one way to make an inference, and looking for connections between rules, looking for exclusions, looking for elements that can never go in a certain space. Right. You often see that in ordering games, right? Like we have a rule that says, you have 7 days, 7 elements, 7 runners. Each runner runs on a different day, and H has to run before L. So, okay, if H has to run before L, L can't go in day 1, right? So that's a common inference that we can make in logic games. And those are really the 2 common ones to look for. So one of the ways to get good at making inferences is don't just expect yourself to notice them. Try to think of, you can make some notes for yourself about patterns that you see in inferences. What are the kind of inferences that you see showing up again and again and again in logic games? And what thought process, what questions can you ask yourself at this point to try to see those inferences? So the questions I usually ask myself is, one question is, can I combine any of the rules together in a meaningful way that must always be true? And the other is, do the rules exclude certain elements from certain spaces? Right? So this is kind of an exclusion. I know G and L can't both be together, so it excludes having all 3 elements on Friday. Same thing with Saturday. So that's one thing that I would add to my diagram then. I'm going to cross off one of those days. Okay. So try to get good at making inferences by asking yourself strategic questions, and looking for common inferences. Also think about what must be true. A lot of times people have trouble with inferences because they're thinking, well, this could go there and that could go there, and could be's can take you down a rabbit hole. We'll worry about what could be, later on when we're asking questions. But at this point in the game, when you're just trying to figure out what can I infer, what can I add to my diagram, focus more on what must be true. Okay. So this is what we're thinking about again as we're reviewing our game. We're sitting here with our, soft music on and our feet up on the couch, and Deanna's got her glass of wine and I got my glass of water, and we're reviewing our logic games. And when we go through the inference step, we're just thinking about what must be true based on the rules that's not actually stated that I could add to my diagram. And it's mainly by looking at your diagram. I would say at this point, more than looking over the rules, again, we're really looking at our diagram for information that we can combine, or information that prevents elements from going in certain spaces. Some games don't actually have that many inferences to make. So, don't be surprised by that. Some games have quite a few, some don't. Okay, so now we've made our inferences. Now, before we dive into the questions, we want to do, at Manhattan Prep, we talk about doing the big pause. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the big pause, but I'll just mention a couple things that are really important to look at right now. One is, notice if there are any elements without rules. Notice if there are any elements without rules. In this case, there aren't, right? G, H, and L are all mentioned in the rules, but a lot of times there will be. And, if there was, let's say none of my rules dealt with L. What I'm going to do then is just put a circle around L, because L is very unrestricted. L is very free in this game if there were no rules about L. As it stands, there actually is a rule about L, the Friday rule. So I'm not going to circle any of my elements because they're all covered by the rules. But that's one thing you want to think about before you go diving into the questions. And also we try to think about like what's going to drive the game. And there are a lot of different ways to describe that, but basically, what do you think is going to have the most influence, or what are you always going to have to think about when you're answering questions? For me in this game, it might be that some of the rules place elements last, right? Like Tuesday, H is last. Friday, not only does it have to be G or L, but that one's going to be last. So that, must be last, or no film is shown after it on that day. That part of all three rules is, kind of telling me a lot about the game. And I'm probably going to have to really think about that quite a bit as I'm answering questions. So that's our big pause. So now the next thing we're going to do is start reviewing questions. And mainly, I'm going to focus on reviewing any questions that I circled. Because, and why am I circling a question or that I flagged for review? If you're working in a prep test book, one of these prep test books, and you're working on paper, then just circle questions that you want to go back and review. If you're doing a digital test on LSAC's website, you might like have a little piece of note paper where you write down just the number of questions in each section, the number for a question in each section that you want to review. So I might not spend a lot of time on a question that I think I got right. Like, question number 6, the answer is C. And the way we get at the correct answer for a question like this, it's asking which of the following could be a complete and accurate description of the order in which the films are shown at the festival. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at each rule, compare each rule to each answer choice, and eliminate every answer that violates that rule. So for example, on Friday, my first rule, I don't know if the first rule limits anything. The second rule, on Friday, either green or limelight, but not both, is shown. So as I look at answer choice B, I can see answer choice B has green and limelight. So I'm going to eliminate answer choice B because it violates the second rule, right? Yeah, you're absolutely right, Masuba. LSAT prep tests do have a flagging tool, and you may want to use the flagging tool to flag questions that you want to go back and review. Just for various reasons, though, it can actually be advantageous to go back to actually write them down on paper, because then you can do a truly blind review. If you're noting like, okay, here's section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4, and you just write down the number of a question that you want to review, or the question numbers in each section that you want to review, then when you get to the end, you don't have to look at that screen that shows you your score and all your answers, right? You can actually like ignore that, or, quickly close it down and then go and review before you have any idea of how you actually did. That's a really valuable part of blind review. Yeah, and in question number 6, I'm not going over fully how to answer question number 6, but C, Charlie, is the correct answer in question number 6. So the way we arrive at that is we look at each rule, we compare each rule one at a time to the answer choices, we eliminate any answer choice that violates a rule, just like answer choice C answer choice B violates the second rule. And so what you'll end up with is, most of the time, you'll end up eliminating 4 of the answers because that answer violates at least one of the rules. And we end up with C being the only one left. C has to be the correct answer. Why is it not A? Yeah, so this gets a little tricky. That's a really good question. Since you asked, I'm going to answer that, because that is one thing that it happens every once in a while in these questions, where you're able to eliminate 3 of the answer choices using the rules, but not all 4. So why do we eliminate A? So if you go through each of your rules and compare them to the answer choices, and you're only able to eliminate 3, and you're going, wow, why are there still 2 answers left? I've used all my rules. Go up and reread the scenario again quickly. Because, yeah, and some people are seeing why, right? There's actually a hidden rule in here. I would call it a hidden rule. It's not really hidden, it's there, but it's easy to forget about. Each film is shown at least once during the festival. And so that's why we eliminate A, because there's no G in answer choice A. So just remember that. You can use this standard process. Like most people who've been preparing for the LSAT for a while know this process for these, what we call orientation questions. Use the rules, eliminate, and look at each rule one at a time, eliminate any answer that violates that rule. But if that doesn't get you all the way to the correct answer, then look up here for a rule that may be kind of buried in the stimulus, or the paragraph. That's why we eliminate A, and we end up with C, Charlie, as the correct answer. Okay, so what does this tell us, though, about reviewing in general? When you review, you want to think about process. When you review, and then some people are asking about specific answers. What I'm going to suggest, this is the June 2000 prep test. You can download it from our Manhattan Prep site, or you can download it from LSAC site. You can take a screenshot. If you want to stick around after the class and you have a question about any of the specific answer choices, I'm happy to answer them, but I kind of want to move on now to a couple other things before we call it quits. So if you're still wondering at the end of class why E is correct, we can talk about that. Or sorry, why E is incorrect, why we would eliminate E. But what I was just saying was, so when you go and review questions, the first thing you want to think about is your process. What is the process for this question? What are the steps that I should follow? Right? And so for this particular question, the process is you look at each rule, you compare each rule to the answers, you eliminate an answer if it violates the rule. If that doesn't get you all the way, there should only be one remaining. If not, I need to go up and look more carefully at my scenario for something that would help me eliminate an answer. That's my process for this. So you always want to ask yourself, if I flag this question to review, I'm going to ask myself, did I follow my process? First of all, what is my process? Did I follow my process? Was there any pre-work? Like, this question is a question that doesn't really require any pre-work. Like, there's nothing that I would do before I look at the answer choices. Other questions that we're going to look at are questions where you should do some pre-work before you look at answer choices. Like, you absolutely should do some pre-work before you look at answer choices. So we want to look at what's my process. Is there any pre-work that I should do after I read the question stem and before I look at answers? And then we want to think about order. And what order means is basically, should I have just skipped this question when I first ran into it? Right? And there are going to be some questions where the answer to that is, yeah, I should have just skipped this one. And one way to know that, this is one of the questions that people asked in the form that we sent out. Can you talk about the order of answering questions? And one way to know, like there's no one set right order that works for every game. I honestly think that it's best to make that decision as you're working through each question. But what I'm going to do is, if I start to work on a question and I feel like I'm making progress, I'm making steady progress, I'm going to keep working. If I get to a point within reason, right? But even if I'm making steady progress, if I feel like it's taken, too long, and what does that mean for you? What does too long mean? For me, it's like more than a minute and a half on any logic games question is a little bit too much for me. I'm really looking to answer logic games questions in a minute or less. But especially if I get stuck, that's really what I'm looking at. If I get stuck at any point on a question, whether it's when I first read the question or as I start moving through the answer choices, if I spend 10 seconds thinking, what am I supposed to do here? I'm done with that question. I'm going to guess and move on. Right? So try to be strict with yourself about that. Try to notice when you're working on a question, if you really feel like you get stuck and you just don't know what to do next, or you've been looking at this question with your pencil in your hand for the last 10 seconds, not really sure what to do next. When you get that feeling like you're not really sure what to do next, that's a time to take a guess and move on. Moving forward could be like, I'm going to dive in and test answer choices. I'm going to create a little scenario to test an answer choice, right? That's still moving forward. It's when you're sitting there with your pencil in your hand. That's the indicator that you should just skip this question, take a guess on it, and move on. It's one of the hardest things for people to do, but that's the key to doing the questions in an effective order. Noticing when you get stuck, and when you get stuck, move on to the next question. Because you can easily spend 2.5, 3 minutes working on a question and not get anywhere with it, and then run out. That's why people run out of time. That's why people go to the final game and only have like 2 minutes left, right? So we're looking at process, we're looking at pre-work. Is there any preliminary work I should do before I look at answer choices? And we're looking at order. What's the order in which I should I have skipped this question? Or after I started working on it, even after maybe 20, 30 seconds of working on this question, did I get stuck? And should I have at that point guessed and moved on? Okay. So always so much that we want to talk about in these free prep hours, and not always as much time as I would like. So I'm going to move on to another question in this game, just to illustrate this process that we're talking about a little bit. And that is, let's move on to this review process, right? Question 8 here. If limelight is never shown again during the festival once green is shown. Okay, so this is a conditional question. This is a conditional question. It's asking me about a specific condition. If limelight is never shown again during the festival once green is shown. So that doesn't mean that this is always going to be the case for the rest of the game. It means when I'm answering this question, I am going to consider that scenario. So this is where pre-work comes in, right? Process, pre-work, and then what's the best order to answer the questions in. So my process for this question involves doing some pre-work before I ever look at the answer choices, before I ever even think about looking at the answer choices. What I'm going to do is do a little bit of pre-work, and that basically means I'm going to draw out what they're telling me. Limelight is never shown again during the festival once green is shown. So that means that all of my L's are before all of my G, or any G. Before like the first G, let's say. So this little hyphen in between, we use that to represent an ordering rule, right? Like if I had a rule that just said L has to be before G, that's how we would diagram it. L has to be earlier than G, right? So I'm using that same, the first thing I'm putting on my paper is that same little type of, representation, that same little notation to diagram just the new condition that they're giving me. Now, often they're going to give you a condition that you can put right on the diagram, like if L is the third, or if L is the third film, or if L is the second film shown on Thursday, right? Sometimes they're going to give you something that you can put on the diagram, but it actually doesn't matter. Whatever they give you, write it down. And then you think about the implications of that. So what are the implications? How does this play into the way that the films are going to show up on my order here, right? In my order. And actually, this is a pretty long question. It's asking, there's a lot in this question. So let me go ahead and read the rest of the question. Which one of the following is the maximum number of film showings that could occur? Okay, so I'm considering in this new situation they're giving me, how do I get the maximum number? All right, so what that's telling me is I don't want to put G too early. I would like to put G as late as possible, because as soon as I put G down, that means I can't have any more L's, which means that that's going to reduce the number, right? So how do I put G as late as possible? So let me go to my last one. I know G has to be, either G or H has to be last, and I can't have any L's after that. So what if I put G as my last element there on Saturday, and then I could have an L before it? And what about on Friday? Okay, G or L can be last. So if I put L here, and it can't be both, right? So if I put L here, I'm going to put H here, because that way I can fill two spaces, right? Not just L by itself and nothing else, but if I put L there, I can put H before it. And now, great, I have, two spaces filled on Friday, two spaces filled on Saturday. So now how do I get the maximum on Tuesday? Well, I'm going to put, I know H, nothing can come after H, so let me put H last, and then I can have both G and L, right? There's no restriction on putting G and L together, or G and H together on Thursday, on the first day, so I can have all three as long as H is last. That's going to allow me to have, oops, wait a minute. Limelight is never shown again during the festival once green is shown. Okay, I just made a mistake. So let's say I got this question wrong. Let's say I got this question wrong. What mistake did I make? Yeah, G can't be on T. Somebody saw it. So this might be the real thing, right? So you get the question, you go back, and maybe, like, we're supposed to be reviewing before we even know whether we got the question wrong or not. So maybe I just had a hard time with this question. Maybe I circled this question, or I flagged it on my digital test, or I wrote it on my scrap paper under this section because I had a hard time with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back and look at my pre-work and see if I made any mistakes, because mistakes are kind of easy to make. And I would look at this and say, oh, wait a minute, I put all 3 on Tuesday or Thursday because I was trying to get the maximum possible. But actually, G can't be, as Evelyn pointed out, G can't be on Thursday. So let me get rid of that G. It's only going to be L and H on Thursday. Okay. Now let me look at the answer choices, right? So this is the process that I would follow in answering the questions. The process I'm going to follow in answering the questions is in answering this question, a conditional question. The processes I'm going to follow is first do my pre-work, diagram something, put something on paper, and then figure out, even if it doesn't go directly on the diagram, even if they're not giving me something that goes directly on the diagram, let me write down what they are giving me. And then figure out, what is that telling me about a complete solution, about what I can put on the diagram. And then I try to fill in as much information as I can on the diagram based on the new condition they're giving me combined with the rules. And then once I do that, then and only then I'm going to go and look at the answer choices. And now it's clear, right? The answer choice is 6. So people don't like to do this preliminary work because it seems like it takes a long time. I mean, I spent a couple minutes describing all this preliminary work that I was doing. But in real time, if I wasn't talking while I was doing it, if I was just doing it on paper, that might take, I don't know, maybe, let's be generous, let's say a minute to do all of this work. But then when I go to the answer choices, I have the answer already here. I know it's 6. D, delta is my correct answer, and I'm done. So very often, you're going to be able to answer choose the correct answer really quickly or evaluate the answers really quickly if you do a little bit of pre-work first. The LSAT, and especially the logic game section, very often rewards doing a little bit of scratch work up front before you look at the answer choices, and then looking at the answer choices. And that's an example here. So again, when I go back and review this, I'm going to think about my process. Do I know the right process for this question? Did I follow the right process in answering the question? And then, you know, if I had trouble with it, did I make any mistakes while I was following that process? Maybe that's where I notice, oh, wait, I put G in Thursday and that's not right. And now I figured out why I had trouble with it. Again, not knowing what the correct answer is, I can figure out why I made a mistake. And that will tell me something about the process that I'm following and how to tune it up. Just knowing what the correct answer is and knowing what I got the question wrong isn't necessarily going to inspire me to really try to understand my process and what step in my process went wrong. So now, once we've understood our process and understood any pre-work that we were supposed to do and whether we did that correctly, now again we're going to think, okay, was this a good question to answer at this point in the game, or should I have just skipped it? And in this case, I'm going to say, yeah, this is a good question to answer right now because it's a conditional question. It gives me something to do. And also, what you'll find is very often you can use this work, and this is something we've covered probably in a few of our other free prep hour sessions. You can often use this work from one question to answer other questions. So as I think about the order that I'm answering questions in, that's one of the things I'm always asking myself is, if I had trouble with a question, should I not only have skipped it just to keep from spending too much time on it, but would it have been possible if I skipped it to use my work from later questions to then go back and answer that question really quickly, right? So again, this is as we look at the questions in a logic game, these are the questions I'm thinking about. This is what I'm looking at as I look at each question that I want to review. I'm thinking about my process. Do I know the correct process, a good process, a solid process for answering this question? Is there any pre-work that I should do? In this case, question 8, yeah, there is pre-work I should do, this little bit of diagramming. And then order. Was this a good question to answer at this point in the game, or would it have been better for me to guess on this question and then maybe go back to it later, or maybe not? Okay, and this is how we review logic games. So we can continue and review an entire game this way. Or we can just selectively review questions that we marked for review. But hopefully what this has done is given you a little insight to, what thought process you want to follow when you're reviewing your work, specifically in logic games. I know I'm a little bit over time, and thanks for the people who are still sticking around. But you can use a similar process for reading comprehension, where you go back and reread the passage first, right? And did I really understand the passage? Is there anything in the passage that I really missed that I should have paid attention to? And then as you go and look at each question, it's really the same thing for each reading comprehension question. What's the process, the thought process I should follow, or the steps I should follow to answer this question? Is there any pre-work that I should do? So for example, if they refer to a sentence in paragraph 3, should I have gone back and read that sentence first? Or is this a question that I can answer just using my big picture understanding? And then, so the third question is, as you're reviewing the question, was this a good question to try to answer at this point? Was it good for me to spend as much time as I spent on this question? Or should I have just skipped it, gone on to the next question, and gone back to it later if I had time? Right? So this is our process. This is a way that we would approach reviewing. Specifically, we looked at a logic game, but we could do the same thing, very similar with an RC passage set and questions. And again, the whole idea for reviewing is not just to understand what the right answer is to this question. And it's not even to understand why it's the right answer. It's to think about your process, any pre-work that you're doing, and the order that you're answering questions in. And from that, you're going to get a lot of answers to how can I work more efficiently? How can I answer more questions in the amount of time that I have? Right? Where am I investing time where it's not paying off and not getting me to a correct answer in a reasonable amount of time? And where am I investing time wisely and working efficiently? So I'm going to answer some questions here in the chat window that are coming up. Somebody was asking for a GRE prep hour from 8 to 9. I don't know if we're doing a GRE prep hour. I don't believe we're doing one tonight. And if we are, it would be in a different room. So Joey, thanks for joining us, but check your schedule again. Check your schedule and your email. And I imagine the GRE prep hour, if it is in this room, is on a different night. Okay, let's go ahead and look at some of these questions that people asked in the chat window. I've heard people say that the first couple and last couple of questions are slightly easier and the middle chunks are the toughest. Depends on your mastery, I guess. I don't know if that pattern really holds up reliably. It varies too much from one game to another to say that reliably. I've seen, there definitely are logic games where the first couple questions can be really tough, and it's actually most efficient and effective to skip them and do the other questions first and come back to them only if you have time and only if you feel like you have a solid way to approach them, a solid process. Could I think about it in spaces, film showing instead of letter specific, knowing that a max of 3 per day? So Ali, I'm sorry if that was maybe specific to one of the questions we were looking at. Somebody asked, why can't G be on T? So in this particular situation, I think that was referring to question 8 here. We're trying to figure out the maximum number of slots that we can fill, the maximum number of films that we can show. And I think somebody explained this. For this question number 8, we're trying to get the maximum number of showings possible. And if we put G on Thursday, we can't have any H's after that. And so the maximum we could possibly have was maybe we can't have any L's after that. We can't have any limelights after that. So if we put G on Thursday, we could only have one limelight going before it. We couldn't have these other limelights, and that would not give us the actual maximum that this question is asking. All right, so I think Evelyn actually explained that. Excellent, excellent. Let me see if I can, scheduling says 8, okay, I see some people talking about a different prep hour, so we'll go ahead and look into that. I'll see if I can help you with that. But just to finish up this, this LSAT prep hour that we're doing, if you need to reread the passage, how long should you spend rereading it? So that question depends on, Nandi, whether you're actually working under time conditions, like, is it actually like you're working on a test and the timer is running? In an actual test, I try to reread as little as possible. I might reread one sentence if I think that sentence is important and I need to really understand it, but I'm going to try to reread as little as possible when I'm actually reading a reading comprehension passage under time conditions. And the reason for that and how we do that is a whole hour-long conversation in itself. It gets into our strategy, our strategy, what we call scale and passage map, where we focus on the main ideas in the passage. So But when you go back and review, if now the time's over, the timed test is over, or the timed exercise is over, and you are trying to review a reading comp passage that you've read before and worked on before, now I'm really going to take my time. I would go ahead and take 5 minutes, 6 minutes to just read the passage and try to compare what your understanding is after reading it more slowly to what your understanding was when you first read it, and see if that tells you anything about what you should be focusing on while you're reading. Because the whole idea in reading comprehension is they give you this 500 to 700 word passage, and not all of the information is really important to answer the questions. So it's knowing which information should I be paying attention to get a big picture understanding, and which things are just details that I can go back and look at later if I need to, right? Okay, let me see. How do I know when it's necessary to, some people, how do I know when it's necessary to build multiple scenarios around a stimulus? So what you're probably talking about is framing, where Isaiah, you can tell me if this is what you're asking about. Multiple scenarios around a stimulus usually happens when there's a clear split, right? So this is what we call framing. So when you do your original diagram, you do your original setup and you make inferences, and you see that with 2 or 3 diagrams, you can actually represent every possible scenario to the game. So an example of that, I'll just kind of give you a big picture example. There might be a logic game where, for example, you have, maybe it's an ordering game, and I'll just draw this out really quickly on the screen to answer Isaiah's question. So maybe you have an ordering game and it's 6 elements, R, S, T, Q, X, and Y. And they're going one at a time in order. Maybe these are runners finishing a race. So first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And you get a rule that says either R must either be first or second, let's say. Whoops, let me make that an R. So that's just what the rule says. Again, I'm making up a game off the top of my head here. R must either be first or second. And so we could actually draw 2 separate scenarios out, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I can draw one where R is in first place, and I can draw another where R is in second place. Now, the reason why I would do that, so that's a clear split. There are only 2 possibilities in this game. Either R is in first or R is in second. So I can draw 2 diagrams that would represent every possible solution to the game. The reason I would do this is if this has an impact on other elements. So for example, if I have a rule that says, maybe a rule says that there must be exactly 2 runners finishing between R and T. And maybe I have another rule that says T must be before Y, right? So, okay, I can connect these 2 together and see that in scenario number 1, T is going to go here and Y must go here. And then scenario number 2 down here, T must go here and Y would have to be in one of these spaces. So not only am I representing the split, but I'm going to add additional, I'm going to make additional inferences for each scenario based on the other rules. So that's why we would do, Isaiah, what you're asking about, drawing multiple scenarios. And I'm just going to say that's, you very rarely, if ever, would diagram out more than one scenario unless there's a clear split like this. And you can see that you're going to make additional inferences. You're going to get additional information that you wouldn't get just from one diagram. So that's, again, we call this framing. It's a whole topic. It's kind of an advanced topic. All the other parts of logic games in terms of being able to just understand the rules, draw a good base diagram, make inferences, being able to recognize not just specific scenarios, but what must be true always, always, always based on the rules. And then your process for answering questions, your process, any pre-work that you would do, and the order that you answer questions in. All that's way more important. And you should focus on that first, I think, before you worry about what we call framing, drawing out multiple scenarios. And if you're drawing out multiple scenarios just to get an idea of how the game works, or you're trying to draw out every scenario and you're making like 5 or 6 or 10 different diagrams, stop Stop, you're hurting me. What we're talking about here is very, very specific, and it only really should happen when there are a very limited number of possibilities. Like you can draw 2 or maybe 3, or maybe on a wild Saturday night, you would draw 4 diagrams, and within those 4 diagrams, you can represent every possible scenario. And you're making some additional inferences. Okay, what are some of the other questions that people asked? Some people asked for the correct answer to question 7. A, alpha was the correct answer to question 7. And again, that was the June 2007 test. You can go to our website. I believe we still have it on our website where you can download that under the free resources. I believe you can download it from LSAC's website. It's the June 2007 prep test that has been the standard go-to prep test, free prep test for a long time. All right. So let me, before, I know some people, we're going a little bit over time here. I know some people are maybe wanting to leave. I want to put a couple links in the chat window before we go. And if you're joining us from home on YouTube, these links will be in the information for the video. So let me go ahead and put this up. This is in the chat window now for everybody to see. So we have links to our free resources, upcoming classes. Like I said, look in those, again, if you're joining us live, look in those upcoming classes if you want. And this coming Sunday, October 4th, 2020, I have an LSAT course that's starting. You can join session 1 and check it out for free if you want. You do have to register in order to do that. But we go into a little bit more detail about exactly how you step by step, how you deal with a logic game. And we get into logical reasoning too in more detail. Our LSAT blog has a lot of good information, our YouTube channel. There's a digital LSAT blog post that we have that tells you a lot about the digital format. We also have some good blog posts about the LSAT Flex. And so if you're taking the at-home version of the LSAT. Okay. Let's see, what are some other questions people are asking? Okay, there's some questions in the Q&A window that I'm going to try to answer. Oh yeah, so a situation, I am working on the first logic game. I can answer 4 out of 5 questions. Would I recommend guessing on the last one right there, or moving on to other games and coming back to the question I skipped at the end? Yeah, always take a guess. If you're going to move on, skip a question and move on, whether or not you think you'll be able to come back to it later, always take a guess, because there's no penalty for guessing. And if you happen to get it right, you get a point. If you get it wrong, it's still a 0, just as if you left it blank. So always fill in, pick your favorite letter and always guess that. Or if you've been able to eliminate down to maybe 2 answer choices, just trust your instincts, trust your gut, pick the one that you think is right. Okay, some of the other questions. Why, after doing more games, I feel like I forget everything from the question game that I skipped? Okay. Evelyn, I'm not sure exactly maybe you can give me some more information, like in the chat window or in the Q&A about that question. I'll try to answer it. Maybe you can give me a little bit more information about what you're asking. Okay. All right, we got another question here in the Q&A that I will do my best to answer. Okay. All right. Okay. So I think I got everything in the Q&A. And I think we're going to call it a night. Looks like a few people are still here. So yeah, if you do, if you want to check out our free resources, come and check out one of our session 1 classes for free. The free prep hour is kind of quick and short. Our normal class sessions are 3, including the free trial, session 1 free trial class is 3 hours. So you get a lot more information. So thanks for being here, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. If you're preparing for the LSAT, I hope your prep goes perfectly, exactly the way you want it to. If you're taking the very next LSAT, I hope everything goes on test day exactly the way you want it to and exactly the way you planned. That's it.